I'm Evelyn Marie Carter, and the day my daughter-in-law called me the nanny who overstayed was the day I realized the $100,000 I'd spent raising her children was worth less to her than a stranger's paycheck. I was 62, hunched over a kitchen table cluttered with crayon drawings and unpaid bills when she said it. Her voice was sharp like a knife slicing through years of love I'd poured into her twins, my grandkids, Lily and Lucas. I'd given up my retirement savings, my little craft shop, and every dream I'd tucked away from myself to be their rock. And in that moment, with her words ringing in my ears, I felt like nothing more than a hired hand who'd forgotten to leave. Let me take you back to where it all began, because this isn't just about that one cruel sentence. It's about a lifetime of being pushed aside, of being told my place was to serve and never to shine. I grew up in a small town in Georgia where the air smelled of peach blossoms, and the expectations for women like me were as heavy as the summer heat. My father was a mechanic, my mother a seamstress, and they raised me to believe that a woman's worth was measured by how well she kept a home. I was the eldest of 4, and by the time I was 12, I was cooking dinners, mending clothes, and tucking my siblings into bed, while my parents worked late. I didn't mind it. Then I loved my family, and I thought sacrifice was just what you did when you loved someone. But I had dreams, too. I wanted to be an artist, to paint murals that told stories of women who rose above their circumstances. I'd sketch in secret, hiding my drawings under my mattress, because my father said art was a hobby, not a life. When I was 17, I fell in love with a boy named Thomas, a charmer with eyes like the sky after a storm. He promised me the world, and I believed him. We married young, and I thought we'd build a life together, one where I could paint, and he could chase his dreams of owning a hardware store. But Thomas wasn't the man I thought he was. He drank too much, worked too little. And when our son Michael was born, Thomas started staying out later, coming home with lipstick on his collar and excuses on his lips. I'd lie awake at night, cradling Michael, wondering where I'd gone wrong. By the time Michael was 5, Thomas left us for good, leaving me with a toddler, a stack of bills, and a heart so broken I didn't think it'd ever beat right again. Being a single mother in the 1980s wasn't easy, especially in a town where divorce was whispered about like a sin. People looked at me with pity or worse, judgment. She couldn't keep her man, they'd say, as if I was the one who'd failed. I took a job as a cashier at the local grocery store, working double shifts to keep the lights on. My dreams of painting faded, replaced by the reality of diaper changes and ramen dinners. But Michael was my light. He'd toddle around our tiny apartment, his laughter filling the cracks in my soul. I'd tell him stories at bedtime, weaving tales of brave women who conquered dragons, hoping he'd grow up to see me as one of them. When Michael was grown, he married Sarah, a woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I tried to love her, but there was a coldness to her, a way she'd dismiss me with a flick of her wrist. "Evelyn, you don't need to fuss," she'd say when I brought over casseroles or offered to babysit. I told myself it was just her way, that she was young and didn't understand how much I wanted to be part of their lives. When Lily and Lucas were born, everything changed. Those twins were my heart outside my body. Lily with her curious eyes and endless questions, and Lucas with his quiet strength and shy smiles. They were my second chance at family. Michael and Sarah struggled, though. He worked long hours as a construction foreman, and she was always chasing the next big thing, a promotion, a side hustle, a lifestyle that screamed success. They'd fight about money, about time, about everything. When the twins were 2, Sarah got a job offer in Chicago, a high-flying marketing gig that meant moving across the country. Michael didn't want to go, but Sarah insisted. "We'll be fine," she told me over the phone, her voice clipped. "We don't need you to follow us." But they did need me. 6 months later, Michael called, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Sarah's job kept her at the office late, and he was drowning trying to manage the twins alone. Daycare was eating up their savings, and the twins were miserable, shuffled between strangers. "Mom," he said, "I hate to ask, but could you come help?" Just for a little while, my heart leapt at the chance to be with Lily and Lucas to be needed. I sold my craft shop, the one I'd opened after years of saving, and packed my life into a suitcase. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd be back to my paints and my dreams soon enough. Chicago was a shock. The city was loud, gray, and lonely in a way my small town never was. Michael and Sarah rented a cramped apartment, and I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. I didn't mind. I was there for the twins. I'd wake them with pancakes shaped like hearts, take them to the park, and read them my old bedtime stories. Lily would tug at my sleeve, begging for one more tale, and Lucas would curl up against me, his little hand in mine. I enrolled them in preschool, helped with homework, and patched up scraped knees. I was their everything, and they were mine. But Sarah didn't see it that way. She'd come home late, her heels clicking on the hardwood, and barely glance at the dinner I'd made, or the crafts I'd helped the twins create. "Thanks, Evelyn," she'd say, like I was a maid who'd finished her shift. Michael was grateful, but he was caught between us, torn between his wife's ambition and his mother's devotion. I started noticing the way Sarah talked about me, little jabs disguised as jokes. "Evelyn's so old-fashioned," she'd say, or "she's great with the kids, but she doesn't get our lifestyle." I swallowed the hurt, telling myself it didn't matter as long as the twins were happy. Then came the money. Michael lost his job during a construction slump, and Sarah's salary wasn't enough to cover their bills. I saw the stress eating at them the way they'd whisper fight when they thought I was asleep. So I offered to help. I had $100,000 saved from selling my shop and years of scrimping. It was meant for my retirement, for a little house with a studio where I could finally paint again. But I looked at Lily and Lucas, at their innocent faces, and I couldn't let them suffer. I handed Michael a check telling him it was for the twins' future school clothes, whatever they needed. He hugged me, tears in his eyes, and promised to pay me back. Sarah just nodded like it was expected. For a while, things were better. Michael found a new job, and the twins thrived. I kept pouring myself into them, teaching Lily to draw and Lucas to tell stories. But the more I gave, the more Sarah pulled away. She'd make plans without telling me, leaving me to scramble when she took the twins for family time that didn't include me. I started feeling like a ghost in their home, present but unseen. I'd overhear her on the phone talking about Evelyn's help, like I was a temporary fix, not family. It stung, but I stayed for the twins, for the love that kept me tethered to them. Then came that day, the one that broke me. It was a Sunday, and I'd spent the morning baking cookies with the twins, their laughter filling the apartment. Sarah came home early, her face tight with something I couldn't read. She sent the twins to their room and turned to me. "Evelyn," she said, "we need to talk." Her words were cold, deliberate. "You've been a big help, but we're settled now. We don't need a nanny anymore." I blinked, confused, thinking she'd misspoken. "I'm not a nanny, Sarah. I'm their grandmother." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Grandmothers visit, Evelyn. They don't move in and overstay. You've done your part. It's time to go." I stood there, my hands trembling, the smell of cookies still warm in the air. A nanny. That's what she thought of me. Not the woman who'd given up her life, her savings, her dreams to raise her children. Not the grandmother who'd sung lullabies and wiped tears. A nanny who'd overstayed. The word cut deeper than anything Thomas had ever done, deeper than the whispers of my small town. It was betrayal, raw and unfiltered from the woman I'd tried so hard to love. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just nodded, grabbed my purse, and walked out, the twins' laughter fading behind me. The Chicago wind hit me like a slap, and I stood on the sidewalk, 62 years old, with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of holes. I'd given everything, my money, my time, my love, and it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. That night, I checked into a cheap motel, the kind with flickering lights and threadbare sheets. I sat on the bed staring at the wall and let myself cry. Not just for Sarah's words, but for every time I'd been pushed aside, every dream I'd buried, every piece of myself I'd given away. I thought of my mother sewing until her fingers bled, and my father who never asked what I wanted. I thought of Thomas, who left me to pick up the pieces, and the town that judged me for it. And I thought of Sarah, who'd taken my love and called it a job. But as the tears fell, something else stirred inside me. A spark. Faint, but stubborn. I wasn't done. I'd lost too much, given too much to let this be the end. I thought of Lily and Lucas, of the stories I'd told them about brave women who conquered dragons. I wasn't ready to let Sarah's words define me. I wasn't ready to be the nanny who overstayed. I was Evelyn Marie Carter, and I had a story of my own to tell. The motel room smelled of stale coffee and regret, but it was the silence that hurt the most. No giggles from Lily, no soft snores from Lucas, just the hum of a broken air conditioner and the weight of my own thoughts. I'd left my suitcase at Michael's apartment, too stunned to grab it when Sarah's words sent me reeling. All I had was my purse, a few crumpled dollars, and the clothes on my back. 62 years old, and I was starting over with less than I'd had when Thomas walked out on me. But as I sat there, the spark I'd felt the night before flickered again, refusing to die. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. I spent that first night tracing the cracks in my life, each one a moment where I'd let someone else decide my worth. My parents who loved me but saw my role as caretaker, not dreamer. Thomas, who'd promised forever and left me with nothing but debt and a baby. The townsfolk who'd whispered behind their hands, calling me that poor Carter girl instead of Evelyn. And now Sarah, who'd taken my love, my money, and my time only to cast me out like an unwanted guest. Each memory was a stone in my chest, heavy and cold, but they weren't the whole story. I'd raised Michael alone, kept a roof over our heads, and built a life from scraps. I'd poured my heart into Lily and Lucas, and no one, not even Sarah, could take that away. The next morning, I forced myself to move. I splashed water on my face, ignoring the tired lines etched around my eyes, and walked to a diner down the street. The waitress, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a name tag that read Doris, poured me coffee without asking. "Rough night, hon," she said, her voice soft but not pitying. I nodded, unable to find words. She slid a plate of toast my way unasked and said, "You look like you need something to hold you together. It's on me." That small act of kindness from a stranger who owed me nothing was enough to keep me from falling apart. I spent the day wandering Chicago, the city's noise, a stark contrast to the quiet ache inside me. I didn't know where to go. Michael hadn't called, and I didn't have the heart to reach out, not yet. The thought of facing Sarah again made my stomach twist. But I couldn't stay in that motel forever, and I couldn't go back to Georgia, not after selling my shop and my roots to come here. I needed a plan, a way to rebuild, but all I could think about was Lily and Lucas. I pictured their faces, the way Lily's eyes lit up when I taught her to sketch flowers, the way Lucas clung to me during thunderstorms. They were my why, even if I couldn't be with them now. By evening, I found myself at a public library, drawn in by the promise of warmth and quiet. The librarian, a young woman with braids and a bright smile, noticed me lingering near the computers. "Need help?" she asked. I hesitated, then admitted I didn't know where to start. I told her I was looking for a place to stay, maybe a job, something to get me back on my feet. Her name was Amara, and she didn't just point me to a computer. She sat with me, showing me how to search for affordable rentals and job listings. "You've got this," she said, her voice steady, "one step at a time." I wanted to believe her, but the weight of Sarah's words still pressed down on me, making every step feel like wading through mud. Amara's kindness gave me enough courage to call Michael that night. I used the motel's phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed. He answered on the third ring, his voice heavy with something I couldn't name. "Mom, where are you? I've been worried sick." I told him about the motel, about Sarah's words, though I couldn't bring myself to repeat them fully. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "I didn't know she said that." I'm so sorry." He begged me to come back, said he'd talk to Sarah, but I heard the strain in his voice the way he was caught between his mother and his wife. "I need some time, Michael," I said. "I'll be okay." It was a lie, but I needed it to be true. Over the next few weeks, I leaned on Amara's guidance. She helped me find a tiny studio apartment barely bigger than a closet, but it was mine. I paid the deposit with the last of my cash, knowing I'd need a job soon. Amara also connected me with a community center that offered free workshops, computer skills, resume writing, even art classes. That last one stopped me cold. Art. The word felt like a memory from another life, one where I dreamed of painting murals that told stories. I signed up telling myself it was just to keep busy, but the moment I held a paintbrush again, something inside me cracked open. The strokes were clumsy at first, my hands stiff from years of neglect, but each one felt like a reclaiming of something I'd lost. The art teacher, a woman named Clara with silver hair and a voice like a lullaby, noticed me struggling. "You've got a gift, Evelyn," she said after class one day. "But you're holding back. What's stopping you?" I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain a lifetime of being told your dreams don't matter? Clara didn't push, but she started staying late to work with me, teaching me techniques I'd never learned as a girl. She'd talk about her own life, how she'd been a single mother too, how she'd fought to make art her career, despite everyone telling her it was impossible. "You're not too old to start again," she said. "No one gets to decide that but you." Clara's words stayed with me, but so did the pain. I'd see mothers with their kids at the park, and my heart would ache for Lily and Lucas. Michael called sometimes, but our talks were short-strained. He'd tell me the twins missed me, that Sarah was trying, but I could hear the distance growing. I didn't ask to visit. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing Sarah's cold smile or hearing her call me Nanny again. Instead, I poured my hurt into my art. I painted a woman standing in a storm, her face fierce and unbroken, surrounded by shadows that couldn't touch her. Clara hung it in the community center's gallery, and when people stopped to look, I felt a flicker of pride, something I hadn't felt in years. But pride wasn't enough to pay the rent. I took a job cleaning offices at night, the kind of work that left my hands raw and my back aching. It was humbling, scrubbing floors while the city slept, but it kept me going. I'd come home at dawn, paint until noon, then head to the community center for classes. It was grueling, but it was mine, a life I was building piece by piece without anyone's permission. I started saving again, not much, but enough to feel like I had a future. I'd lie awake some nights wondering if Lily and Lucas were okay, if they'd forgotten me. I'd whisper their names like a prayer, promising myself I'd find a way back to them, not as a nanny, but as their grandmother, whole and unbroken. One day, Clara pulled me aside after class. "There's an art show coming up," she said. "Local artists, nothing fancy, but it's a chance to sell your work. I think you should enter." My stomach twisted. Sell my work? The idea felt impossible, like stepping into a world I didn't belong in. But Clara's eyes were steady, believing in me in a way no one ever had. "You're ready, Evelyn," she said. "Your story deserves to be seen." I thought of Sarah, of her cruel words, and something inside me shifted. I wasn't painting for her or for Michael or even for the twins. I was painting for me, for the girl who'd hidden her sketches under her mattress, for the woman who'd given everything and still had something left to give. I spent weeks preparing, pouring my heart into every canvas. I painted the twins, Lily's curious eyes, Lucas's shy smile blended with images of my own life, the Georgia peaches, the empty bottles Thomas left behind the Chicago skyline that had swallowed me whole. Each piece was a piece of me, raw and honest. When the show came, I stood in the corner, my heart pounding as strangers looked at my work. A woman bought my storm painting, tears in her eyes, as she told me it reminded her of her own struggles. Another bought a sketch of Lily, saying it captured a love that doesn't quit. I made $200 that night, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the feeling of being seen, of mattering not as a mother or a grandmother or a nanny, but as Evelyn. I went home and cried not from sadness, but from the weight of realizing I was still here, still fighting. Sarah's words had cut me, but they hadn't killed me. I was building something new, something that belonged to me. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward, not just surviving. I thought of Lily and Lucas, and I promised myself I'd show them one day, not just how much I loved them, but how strong their grandmother could be. The art show was a turning point, a moment where I saw myself not as the woman Sarah had dismissed, but as someone with a voice, a story, a spark that hadn't gone out. That $200 felt like a fortune, not because it was much, but because it was mine, earned through my own hands, my own heart. I tucked it away in a tin box under my bed, the same way I'd hidden my sketches as a girl, but this time, it wasn't a secret. It was a promise. I was Evelyn Marie Carter, and I was clawing my way back to myself, one brushstroke at a time. The weeks that followed were a blur of paint and exhaustion. My night job cleaning offices left me bone-tired, my hands smelling of bleach, and my knees aching from scrubbing floors. But I'd come home at dawn, the Chicago skyline just starting to glow, and I'd paint. My tiny studio was a mess of canvases and coffee mugs, but it was alive in a way my life hadn't been in years. I painted the twins, most of all Lily's wild curls, Lucas's quiet strength, but I wove in pieces of my own story, too. A cracked wedding ring for Thomas, a sewing needle for my mother, a peach tree for the girl I'd been. Each painting was a reckoning, a way of facing the pain I'd carried and turning it into something beautiful. Clara, my art teacher, became my anchor. She'd stop by the community center during my classes, her silver hair catching the light as she studied my work. "You're not just painting Evelyn," she said once, her voice soft but firm. "You're telling the truth. That's what makes it powerful." Her words stayed with me, especially on the hard days when the loneliness crept in. I missed Lily and Lucas so much, it felt like a physical ache, a hole in my chest that no painting could fill. Michael called sometimes, his voice heavy with guilt, but he never invited me to see the twins, and I didn't ask. I couldn't face Sarah, not yet, not when her words still echoed in my head, the nanny who overstayed. But Clara saw me, and so did Amara, the librarian, who'd helped me find my footing. Amara started dropping by the community center, bringing me books on art history, or just sitting with me during breaks. She was young, barely 30, but she had a wisdom that made me feel understood. "You remind me of my mom," she told me one day, her braids swaying as she leaned forward. "She raised me alone, worked 2 jobs, never complained. But I wish she'd let herself dream. You know, you're doing that, Evelyn. It's brave." I didn't feel brave. I felt like a woman scraping by, haunted by the family she'd lost. But Amara's belief in me, like Clara's, was a lifeline. One evening, Clara invited me to her apartment for tea. It was a small place cluttered with paintings and books, the kind of home that felt like a hug. Over chamomile and shortbread, she told me about her own life, how she'd left an abusive marriage, raised her daughter alone, and fought to become an artist when everyone said she was too old, too poor, too broken. "I was 50 when I sold my first painting," she said, her eyes crinkling with a smile. "You're not too late, Evelyn. You're just getting started." She pulled out a flyer for a local art grant, a $5,000 award for emerging artists. "Apply," she said, sliding it across the table. "Your work deserves it." I stared at the flyer, my heart pounding. A grant. The idea felt absurd, like something for people with degrees and galleries, not a grandmother cleaning offices. But Clara's faith in me was unshakable, and I couldn't let her down. I spent days writing the application, pouring out my story, not just the art, but the life behind it. I wrote about raising Michael, about giving everything for Lily and Lucas, about Sarah's betrayal and the paintings that had saved me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever written, each word a piece of my soul laid bare. When I submitted it, I felt exposed, but also free, like I'd finally claimed my own story. While I waited to hear back, life kept moving. I started selling more paintings at local shows, small sums that added up $50 here, $100 there. It wasn't enough to quit my cleaning job, but it let me buy better supplies, a proper easel canvases that didn't warp. People started recognizing me at the community center, calling me the artist instead of the grandma. It was a strange feeling being seen for something other than what I'd done for others. I liked it, but it also scared me. What if I failed? What if this was just a fluke and I'd end up back where I started, invisible and used up? Then Michael called. It was late, the kind of call that makes your heart stop before you even pick up. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "Can we talk in person?" I hadn't seen him since I'd left their apartment, and the thought of facing him made my stomach twist. But I heard the desperation in his voice, and I couldn't say no. We met at a coffee shop near my studio, a neutral place that didn't belong to either of our worlds. He looked older, his eyes shadowed, his shoulders slumped. "I'm so sorry," he said before I could even sit down. "For what Sarah said, for letting you leave for everything." He told me things had been falling apart. Sarah's job was demanding more than ever, and she was unraveling under the pressure. The twins were acting out, missing me, asking why Nana didn't come anymore. Michael had tried to talk to Sarah, but she'd shut him down, insisting they didn't need me. "I didn't fight hard enough for you," he said, tears in his eyes. "I should have stood up to her. I wanted to be angry, to yell at him for letting Sarah erase me, but all I felt was sadness. He was my boy, caught in a marriage that was breaking him, just like mine had broken me years ago. I miss the twins," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I can't come back, not like before." He nodded like he'd expected it. He reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of drawings, Lily's flowers, Lucas's stick figure stories. "They made these for you," he said. I clutched them to my chest, tears spilling over. For the first time in months, I felt connected to them again, even if it was just through paper and crayon. Michael promised to bring them to see me soon, away from Sarah, and I held on to that promise like a lifeline. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. My hands shook as I opened it, the words blurring through my tears. I'd won the art grant. $5,000 plus a chance to show my work at a citywide exhibition. Clara screamed when I told her, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. Amara brought me flowers, her smile brighter than the sun. I used the money to quit my cleaning job, renting a small shared studio space where I could paint full-time. I bought a phone too, so I could call Michael and hear about the twins. Things weren't perfect. He was still navigating Sarah's anger, but he brought Lily and Lucas to see me one weekend, and their hugs were worth every sleepless night. I painted more than ever preparing for the exhibition. I created a series called Roots and Wings, each piece a chapter of my life. The peach tree of my childhood, the broken home I'd built with Thomas, the twins' laughter, Sarah's cold eyes, and finally, a woman rising, her hands full of color, her heart unbroken. The exhibition was held in a sleek gallery downtown, and I felt like an imposter in my secondhand dress surrounded by people who talked about art like it was a language I'd never learned. But when they saw my work, they stopped talking. They listened. A critic wrote about my raw, unflinching honesty, and by the end of the night, I'd sold 3 paintings for a whopping $500. I went home and sat in my studio, the city quiet outside my window. I thought of Sarah, of her cruel words, and I realized they didn't hurt as much anymore. I wasn't the nanny who overstayed. I was Evelyn, an artist, a grandmother, a woman who'd fought her way back from the edge. I didn't know what would happen with Michael and Sarah or if I'd ever fully have the twins back in my life. But I had myself, and that was enough for now. I picked up a brush and started a new painting, a single figure standing tall, her shadow stretching far behind her, full of stories yet to be told. The exhibition was like a door swinging open, letting light into a room I'd kept dark for too long. I was still Evelyn Marie Carter, the woman who'd scrubbed floors and cried herself to sleep, but I was also someone new, someone whose paintings hung on gallery walls, whose story strangers whispered about with awe. That $500 from the sold pieces felt like a lifeline, not just for the money, but for what it meant I was building something real, something that couldn't be taken away by a cruel word or a closed door. But even as I stood taller, the ache for Lily and Lucas never faded. Their drawings were pinned above my easel, a reminder of why I kept going even when my heart felt like it might break all over again. The grant money gave me breathing room. I moved out of the cramped shared studio and into a small but bright space of my own with a window that caught the morning sun. It wasn't fancy, just a concrete floor and walls I'd already splattered with paint, but it was mine, a place where I could create without apology. I bought better brushes, vibrant oils, and a sturdy table for sketching. For the first time in years, I wasn't scraping by counting pennies for bus fare or instant noodles. I could afford to eat fresh fruit to buy a warm coat for Chicago's biting winters. It was a small victory, but it felt like a revolution. Clara and Amara celebrated with me, bringing wine and laughter to my new studio. Clara raised a glass, her silver hair glowing in the lamplight. To Evelyn, she said, "Who's just getting started?" Amara grinned, adding, "To the woman who paints truth." Their words wrapped around me like a blanket, warming the parts of me that still felt raw from Sarah's betrayal. They weren't just friends. They were proof that I wasn't alone, that I could build a family out of choice, not just blood. We stayed up late talking about art and dreams, and for a moment I forgot the weight of everything I'd lost. But the past never stays buried. Michael called more often now, his voice lighter, like he was trying to bridge the gap between us. He'd bring the twins to my studio every few weeks, and those visits were my everything. Lily would run in her curls, bouncing, and throw her arms around me, babbling about school and her new favorite color, purple, always purple. Lucas was quieter, but he'd sit close, sketching beside me, his small hand steady as he copied my lines. I'd teach them to mix colors, laughing when Lily smeared paint on her nose, and my heart would swell until it hurt. These moments were precious, but they were also fragile, shadowed by Sarah's absence. Michael never mentioned her, and I didn't ask. I didn't want to know what she thought of me now or if she even cared. My art kept growing, pulling me forward, even on the days when I wanted to curl up and hide. Clara connected me with a local art collective, a group of women who created together, shared resources, and lifted each other up. They were fierce, unapologetic, and they welcomed me like I'd always belonged. Through them, I started showing my work at bigger venues, community festivals, pop-up galleries, even a small museum's emerging artist showcase. My Roots and Wings series became something people recognized, a story of resilience that resonated with women who'd fought their own battles. I'd stand by my paintings listening as strangers told me how my work made them feel seen, how it reminded them of their own mothers, daughters, or selves. Each conversation chipped away at the shame Sarah had left me with, replacing it with a quiet, stubborn pride. Then came the scholarship. The art collective nominated me for a program at a prestigious Chicago Art Institute, a 6-month intensive for mid-career artists fully funded with a stipend. Mid-career. The word made me laugh, a 62-year-old grandmother who'd only started painting again a year ago. But when I got the acceptance letter, I cried. Not just for the opportunity, but for the girl I'd been the one who'd hidden her sketches and thought her dreams were impossible. The program was competitive with master classes, critiques, and a final exhibition that could open doors to galleries I'd never dared imagine. I accepted, my hands shaking as I signed the forms, feeling like I was stepping off a cliff and trusting I'd learn to fly. The program was grueling. The instructors were brilliant but brutal, tearing apart my technique to build it back stronger. My classmates were younger, most in their 30s, with art degrees and confidence I envied. At first I felt out of place, like a fraud who'd snuck in. But I kept painting, pouring my life into every canvas, my childhood in Georgia, my years as a single mother, the twins' laughter, Sarah's cold eyes. My work stood out not because it was polished, but because it was raw, unfiltered, a heart laid bare. One instructor, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for never praising anyone, pulled me aside after a critique. "Evelyn," she said, "your work doesn't just speak, it screams. Keep going." I went home and painted until dawn, her words fueling me through the exhaustion. The scholarship changed how I saw myself. I wasn't just a grandmother or a failed wife. I was an artist, someone whose voice mattered. I started getting commissions small but steady for portraits and custom pieces. A local cafe hung my paintings on their walls, and a women's shelter asked me to create a mural for their community room. The mural was my favorite. A woman rising from ashes surrounded by flowers and stars, her face fierce and unbroken. When I finished, the women at the shelter hugged me, some crying as they told me how it made them feel strong. I realized then that my art wasn't just for me, it was for every woman who'd been told she was too much or not enough. Michael noticed the change, too. During one of our visits, he watched me paint with the twins, his eyes soft. "You're different, Mom," he said. "Happier, stronger." I wanted to tell him it wasn't happiness. Not exactly, it was purpose, a fire I'd found when I thought I had nothing left. But I just smiled and handed him a brush, letting him join us. The twins were thriving, he said, but I could see the strain in his face, the way his marriage was pulling him apart. I didn't push, but I worried. Sarah's shadow hung over us even when she wasn't there. As the scholarship program neared its end, I prepared for the final exhibition, a showcase at a renowned gallery. I created a new piece for it, my biggest yet, a triptych called Reclamation. The first panel showed a girl under a peach tree, her dreams hidden. The second showed a woman surrounded by broken glass, her hands bleeding but still reaching. The third showed a woman standing tall, her shadow full of color, her eyes unafraid. It was my life distilled into paint, and it was terrifying to share. But when I hung it in the gallery, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I wasn't hiding anymore. The exhibition night was a blur of faces and voices. My classmates' work shone, but mine drew a crowd. People lingered in front of Reclamation, whispering some wiping tears. A gallery owner approached me, a woman with sleek hair and a sharp smile offering to represent me. "Your work has soul," she said. "We could do something big with this." I nodded, too stunned to speak, my heart racing with possibilities. By the end of the night, Reclamation sold for $4,000, and I had a stack of business cards from curators and collectors. Clara and Amara were there cheering like I'd won the lottery, and Michael brought the twins, who ran to me with proud smiles. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But even in that moment, I thought of Sarah. I wondered if she knew, if she'd heard about the grandmother she'd called a nanny, now painting for the world. I didn't want her apology. I wanted her to see me, to know I'd risen despite her. I went home that night, my studio quiet, and looked at Lily's and Lucas's drawings. I painted a small piece just for them, a grandmother holding two children surrounded by stars, a love that no one could erase. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew I'd keep fighting, not just for them, but for the woman I'd become, the one who'd found her wings and wasn't afraid to fly. The gallery exhibition was a high I hadn't known. I could feel a moment where I stood in the center of my own life, not as someone's mother or grandmother or discarded help, but as Evelyn the artist, the woman who'd turned her pain into something the world couldn't ignore. The $4,000 from Reclamation was more money than I'd ever made at once, and the gallery owner's offer to represent me felt like a key to a door I'd never dared knock on. But as I walked home that night, Lily's hand in one of mine and Lucas's in the other, Michael trailing behind with a proud but tired smile, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was a beginning, and beginnings are fragile, full of hope and fear tangled together. The weeks after the exhibition were a whirlwind. The gallery owner, Vanessa, was true to her word. She was sharp ambitious and saw my work as something that could sell with a story. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. My paintings weren't just products. They were pieces of my soul. But Vanessa's confidence was infectious, and I trusted her to guide me through a world I barely understood. She got my work into 2 more shows, one in Chicago and one in Milwaukee, and suddenly I was signing prints and taking meetings with curators who tossed around words like authenticity and narrative depth. I'd nod my secondhand dress feeling like a costume, but inside I was soaring. People wanted my art. They wanted me. The money started coming in, not a flood, but a steady stream. I sold 5 paintings in a month, enough to cover rent and buy a proper bed, no more lumpy mattress on the floor. I even opened a savings account, something I hadn't had since I gave Michael my $100,000. Every deposit felt like a brick in a new foundation, a life I was building with my own hands. I hired a part-time assistant, a quiet art student named Mia, who helped me manage emails and shipping. It was strange having someone work for me, but Mia's shy smile and quick hands made it feel right, like I was paying forward the kindness Clara and Amara had shown me. My art was evolving too. I started experimenting with bolder colors, sharper lines weaving in symbols of my past and present. I painted a series called Unseen Portraits of Women Who'd Been Overlooked. My mother, her hands worn from sewing. Clara, her eyes fierce with wisdom. Even Sarah, her face cold but human, a reminder that hurt people hurt others. The series was personal, almost too personal, but when I showed it at the Milwaukee Gallery, it sold out. A critic called it a love letter to the invisible, and I cried when I read the review, not because of the praise, but because it felt like someone had finally seen the girl I'd been the one who'd hidden her dreams under her mattress. Clara and Amara were my constants, my cheerleaders through every step. Clara started calling me the phoenix, teasing that I'd risen from ashes she hadn't even known I'd been buried in. Amara, practical as ever, helped me set up a website to sell prints, and when it launched, orders came in from as far as California. "You're a brand now, Evelyn," she said, laughing as she showed me the analytics. A brand. The word felt foreign, but I liked the sound of it. The idea that I could be more than a name, more than a grandmother who'd been cast aside. But no amount of success could fill the hole left by Lily and Lucas's absence. Michael's visits with them were the highlight of my weeks, but they were 2 short stolen hours between Sarah's schedule and his own exhaustion. The twins were growing so fast. Lily was 7 now, her questions sharper, her drawings more detailed. Lucas was quieter, but his hugs were tighter, like he was afraid I'd disappear again. I'd paint with them in my studio, teaching them to blend colors, telling them stories about the brave women in my paintings. "Are you one of them?" Nana Lily asked, once her eyes wide. I kissed her forehead and said, "I'm trying, sweetheart." But the truth was, I wasn't sure. I was still fighting, still afraid that one wrong step could send me back to that motel room alone with nothing but my tears. Michael was struggling, I could see it. His marriage was a tightrope and he was wobbling. He'd talk about the twins, about work, but never about Sarah, and the silence said enough. One day, as we sat in my studio after the twins had fallen asleep on my couch, he broke. "She's not the same mom," he said, his voice raw. "She's angry all the time at me, at the kids, at the world. I don't know how to fix it." I wanted to hate Sarah, to blame her for everything, but I saw the toll she'd taken on my son, and it hurt more than her words ever had. "You can't fix her, Michael." I said, my hand on his. "You can only decide what you're willing to carry." He nodded, but I knew he wasn't ready to let go, not yet. I threw myself into my work, partly to escape the worry, partly because it was the one thing I could control. Vanessa got me a commission for a public mural in Chicago's South Side, a massive piece for a community center that served low-income families. It was daunting, 50 feet wide, visible to thousands, but it was also a chance to leave a mark, to tell a story that wasn't just mine. I spent weeks sketching meeting with community leaders, listening to their hopes. The mural became legacy, a tapestry of faces, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, woven with flowers, books, and stars, a celebration of resilience. When I painted the final stroke, a crowd gathered, clapping and cheering. A woman my age hugged me, tears in her eyes, and said, "This is us." Thank you. I went home and sobbed, not from sadness, but from the weight of being part of something bigger than myself. The mural brought attention I wasn't prepared for. A local news station did a segment on me, calling me Chicago's grandmother artist, a title that made me cringe, but also smile. The story spread online, and suddenly my website was flooded with orders, my inbox full of interview requests. Vanessa was thrilled, booking me for speaking engagements at art schools and women's conferences. I was terrified of public speaking, my voice shaking as I stood in front of crowds. But I told my story. Georgia, Thomas, Michael, the twins. Sarah, the $100,000, the art that saved me. People listened, some crying, some clapping, and I realized my voice wasn't just in my paintings. It was in me too, and it was loud. One of those speeches changed everything. It was at a women's empowerment conference, a room of 500 people, mostly young women with dreams bigger than their doubts. I told my story raw and unfiltered, ending with the mural and the idea that our worth isn't tied to what others think of us. The applause was deafening, but what stuck with me was a woman who approached me afterward, her eyes bright with tears. She was a curator for a national art foundation, and she wanted to nominate me for a major award, a $25,000 grant for artists who'd overcome adversity. "Your work is important, Evelyn," she said. "Not just for you, but for all of us." I could barely speak, my throat tight with gratitude. The nomination process was intense, requiring a portfolio, letters of recommendation, and a personal statement. Clara and Amara helped me polish every word, every image, pouring their belief into me when mine wavered. I didn't win the grant, not yet, but the nomination alone got my work noticed by galleries in New York and Los Angeles. Vanessa was already planning a solo show talking about six-figure potential, a number that made my head spin. I was scared, but I was also ready, or at least ready to try. I'd come too far to shrink back now. Through it all, I kept painting for Lily and Lucas. I made them a book of sketches, each page, a story from my life, a way to show them who their Nana was, not just as their caretaker, but as a woman with dreams and scars and strength. I gave it to them during a visit, and Lily hugged it to her chest, promising to read it every night. Lucas looked at me, his eyes serious, and said, "You're not going away again, right, Nana?" I knelt down, my heart breaking, and said, "I'm right here, sweetheart. Always." I didn't know if I could keep that promise, not with Sarah still in the picture, but I'd fight for it with everything I had. As I stood in my studio, surrounded by canvases and the smell of paint, I felt the weight of how far I'd come. I wasn't the woman who'd walked out of Michael's apartment broken by Sarah's words. I was Evelyn, an artist, a voice, a grandmother who'd given everything and still found more to give. The road ahead was uncertain. Michael's marriage, the twins' future, my own dreams, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I picked up a brush, the canvas blank, and waiting and started to paint, not knowing where the colors would take me, but trusting they'd tell a story worth hearing. The nomination for the National Art Grant was like a spotlight illuminating parts of my life I'd kept in shadow for too long. I didn't win, but the attention it brought was enough to push me further than I'd ever thought possible. Galleries in New York and Los Angeles were calling, and Vanessa, my gallery owner, was already planning a solo show in Chicago talking about collectors and critics, like they were part of my everyday life. I was 63, a grandmother who'd once thought her dreams were buried under a lifetime of sacrifice, and now I was standing on the edge of something big, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and fire. But even as my art soared, the ache for Lily and Lucas, for Michael, for the family I'd lost and found and lost again, was a constant pull, a tether to the woman I'd always been. The solo show was set for a sleek gallery in Chicago's Art District, a space with white walls and lights that made every painting glow. Vanessa pushed me to create a new series, something ambitious that would cement my name. I called it Unbroken, a collection of 10 large-scale paintings, each one a chapter of resilience, not just mine, but every woman's who'd ever been told she was less. I painted my mother's hands worn but strong, Clara's fierce eyes, Amara's quiet courage, and the twins, their faces bright with hope. I even painted Sarah not as a villain, but as a woman trapped in her own story, her eyes searching for something she couldn't name. It was my way of forgiving her, not for her sake, but for mine, so I could let go of the hurt that had clung to me like damp cloth. The work consumed me. I'd paint through the night, my studio a chaos of color and coffee cups, my hands stained with oil, and my heart laid bare. Mia, my assistant, would bring me sandwiches when I forgot to eat her quiet presence, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Clara and Amara stopped by, too, offering feedback and laughter, keeping me grounded when the pressure felt like too much. "You're not just making art," Evelyn Clara said one night, her voice soft. "You're making history." I laughed, thinking she was exaggerating, but her eyes were serious, and I carried her words with me like a talisman. The show was a gamble. Vanessa had invited major critics collectors, even a few museum curators, and the stakes were higher than anything I'd faced. I poured every penny I'd saved into framing, shipping, and promotion, trusting Vanessa's promise that it would pay off. I bought a new dress, navy blue and simple, but it felt like armor, a way to stand tall in a world that still intimidated me. The twins were my inspiration, their sketchbook of stories tucked in my bag as I walked into the gallery on opening night. Michael had promised to bring them, and the thought of their faces in the crowd gave me courage, even as I worried about Sarah's shadow lingering over us. The gallery was packed a sea of faces I didn't know, their voices buzzing with anticipation. My paintings lined the walls, each one a piece of my soul, and I stood in the center, my hands trembling as Vanessa introduced me. Evelyn Marie Carter. She said, her voice carrying an artist who paints not just with color, but with truth. The applause was warm, but it was the silence that followed as people moved to the paintings that felt like a judgment. I watched them linger, some whispering, some wiping tears, and I felt exposed, like I'd opened my chest and invited the world to look inside. Then I saw them, Lily and Lucas, their eyes wide as they ran to me, Michael trailing behind. Nana Lily shouted, throwing her arms around me, her purple dress smudged with glitter. Lucas hugged me too, his smile shy but bright. Michael's eyes were red like he'd been crying, and he pulled me into a hug that said more than words ever could. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he whispered. I held them close, the noise of the gallery fading, and for a moment it was just us, my family, the heart of everything I'd fought for. The night was a triumph. 8 of the 10 paintings sold for prices that made my head spin, $20,000 in total. Critics wrote glowing reviews calling Unbroken a masterwork of emotional depth. A curator from a New York museum approached me hinting at a possible acquisition, and Vanessa was already talking about a national tour. I was overwhelmed, my heart full and my mind racing, but it was the twins' pride that meant the most. Lily pointed at a painting of her and Lucas, saying, "That's us, Nana, we're famous." Lucas just held my hand, his small fingers steady, and I knew I'd done something they'd carry with them, a legacy stronger than money or fame. But success didn't erase the cracks in my family. Michael stayed late helping me clean up after the show, and we talked, really talked for the first time in months. He told me Sarah was spiraling her job, consuming her anger pushing everyone away. "She's jealous, Mom," he said, his voice low. "Of you, of what you've become. She sees your name in the papers and it kills her." I was stunned. Jealous. The woman who'd called me a nanny, who'd dismissed me like I was nothing. But as he spoke, I saw it the way my rise had mirrored her struggles, the way my freedom must have felt like a rebuke to her cage. I didn't pity her not after everything, but I understood. And that understanding was a weight I hadn't expected. I kept moving forward because stopping wasn't an option. The solo show led to more opportunities, a guest lecture at the Art Institute, where I'd studied a commission for a corporate office, even an invitation to speak at a national women's art conference. I was nervous, but I said yes to everything, trusting the momentum to carry me. My paintings were selling faster than I could create them, and Vanessa hired a PR firm to manage the demand. I started a scholarship fund in my name, small, but growing, to help older women pursue art women like me, who'd been told it was too late. Every step felt like a reclamation, a way of proving Sarah wrong, but also proving myself right. Lily and Lucas were my anchor. Michael brought them to my studio more often, and we'd spend hours painting, telling stories, building a world where Sarah's words couldn't reach us. But I saw the strain in them too, the way Lily's laughter was quieter, the way Lucas clung to me like he was afraid I'd vanish. Michael was fighting for custody, he told me one night, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Sarah's behavior had escalated her anger, spilling over into neglect, and he couldn't let it continue. I listened, my heart breaking for him, for the twins, for the family we'd tried to hold together. "I'll be here," I said, and I meant it not as a nanny, but as a grandmother, a rock they could lean on. The conference was a turning point. It was held in a grand hotel with a stage bigger than any I'd faced. I spoke to 1,000 women, my voice steady as I told my story. Georgia, Thomas, Michael, the twins, Sarah, the $100,000, the art that saved me. I ended with Unbroken showing slides of the paintings, and when I finished, the room stood clapping, cheering, some crying. I felt like I'd given them something, not just my story, but a spark, a reminder that they could rise too. Afterward, women lined up to talk to me, sharing their own stories of loss and triumph, and I listened, my heart full, knowing I'd found my purpose. That night, I got a call from Vanessa. The New York Museum wanted Unbroken for their permanent collection, and they were offering $50 and $1,000. I sat on my studio floor, the phone shaking in my hand, and cried not just for the money, but for the girl I'd been the one who'd thought her dreams were impossible. I thought of Lily and Lucas, of the sketchbook I'd made them, and I knew this was for them too, a way to show them that their Nana was unbreakable, that love and strength could coexist. I didn't know what would happen with Michael's custody battle, or if Sarah would ever see me for who I was, but I knew I'd keep painting, keep fighting, keep rising for myself and for the family I'd never stop loving. The news about the New York Museum wanting Unbroken for their permanent collection hit me like a wave, pulling me under and lifting me up all at once. $50,000 was a number I couldn't wrap my head around, not when I'd spent years counting quarters for bus fare. But it wasn't just the money, it was the validation, the idea that my paintings, my story, would live in a place where people from all over the world could see them. I was 63, a grandmother who'd been called a nanny, and now my art was being called a legacy. I sat in my studio that night, surrounded by the smell of paint and the sketches Lily and Lucas had left behind, and I let myself feel it, pride not just for what I'd done, but for who I'd become. The weeks leading up to the museum acquisition were a blur of paperwork and publicity. Vanessa handled the details, her sharp efficiency, a contrast to my still wobbly confidence. The museum planned a public unveiling, a ceremony where I'd speak about Unbroken and its meaning. It was daunting, hundreds of people, critics, donors, and cameras. But I said yes, because saying yes had become my way of fighting back, of proving I wasn't the woman Sarah had tried to erase. Clara and Amara helped me prepare, rehearsing my speech until I could say it without shaking, reminding me that my voice was as powerful as my paintings. The attention brought more than just the museum deal. My solo show had sparked a wave of interest, and now galleries in London and San Francisco were asking for exhibitions. A documentary filmmaker contacted Vanessa wanting to tell my story, a grandmother who'd turned betrayal into art, who'd risen from a motel room to museum walls. I was hesitant, worried about exposing Michael and the twins, but Vanessa convinced me it could inspire others. "Your story isn't just yours anymore, Evelyn," she said. "It's theirs too." I agreed on the condition that the twins' privacy was protected, and the filmmaker, a kind woman named Lena, started shadowing me. Her camera capturing the quiet moments of my life as much as the big ones. But the spotlight wasn't all bright. The more my name appeared in articles and interviews, the more I felt Sarah's shadow creeping back. Michael was in the middle of a custody battle now, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. Sarah had hired a lawyer fighting to keep the twins, but Michael's case was strong. Her long hours, her emotional distance, the way she'd pushed everyone away. He'd moved out, renting a small apartment near my studio, and the twins were with him most of the time. I'd watch them while he worked, their laughter filling my days, but I saw the toll it was taking. Lily's questions were sharper now, asking why Mommy was so mad. Lucas was quieter, his drawings darker, full of storms and broken houses. I held them close, painting with them, telling them stories, but I couldn't shield them from the pain, and that broke me in a way nothing else had. The museum unveiling was set for a crisp October evening, the Chicago skyline glittering outside the Grand Hall. I wore a dress Clara had helped me pick, deep green, like the forests of my childhood, and I felt strong even if my hands trembled as I stepped to the podium. The room was full museum patrons, art critics, my friends, and most importantly, Michael and the twins. Lily waved from the front row, her purple headband sparkling, and Lucas gave me a small, proud smile. I took a breath and began telling the story of Unbroken, the girl who'd dreamed under a peach tree, the mother who'd fought for her son, the grandmother who'd given everything, the artist who'd found her voice. I spoke of Sarah not by name, but as a wound I'd carried and overcome, a reminder that our worth isn't defined by those who hurt us. The applause was thunderous, but it was the faces in the crowd that stayed with me. Women nodding, some crying men, looking at me with a respect I'd never known. A critic from the New York Times called it a speech as powerful as her paintings, and the article went viral, my name trending on social media alongside words like inspiration and resilience. But the moment that mattered most was after, when Lily ran to me, hugging my legs, and said, "Nana, you're a hero." Lucas joined her, his arms tight around me, and Michael's eyes were wet as he said, "I always knew you were amazing, Mom, but this is everything." Then came the confrontation I hadn't expected. Sarah showed up at the museum, uninvited, her face pale and her eyes sharp with something I couldn't read. Michael tensed, stepping between us, but I put a hand on his arm, telling him it was okay. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. She stood there, her designer coat out of place among the crowd, and said, "Evelyn, we need to talk." Her voice was tight, like she was holding back a storm. I nodded, leading her to a quiet corner. My heart steady, even as my mind raced. She didn't apologize, not exactly, but her words were raw, unpolished. "I saw the article," she said. "The speech, the paintings, all of it. I didn't understand what you were doing, what you'd given up." Her eyes flicked away, then back to mine. "I was wrong, Evelyn. About you, about everything." I waited, expecting more, but that was all she had. No explanation, no plea for forgiveness, just an admission that hung between us like a frayed thread. I thought of the $100,000, the years I'd spent raising her children, the word nanny that had cut me to the bone. I wanted to be angry, to throw her words back at her, but all I felt was release, like I'd been carrying a weight I could finally set down. "I don't need your approval, Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I never did. But those kids, they need you to be better. For them, not for me." She flinched like I'd struck her, And for a moment, I saw the woman behind the cold smile, the one who was losing everything and didn't know how to stop it. She nodded, her lips trembling, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I didn't know if she'd change, if she'd fight for the twins, or let her pride win. But it wasn't my battle anymore. I'd fought mine, and I'd won. Michael and the twins stayed with me that night, sleeping over in my studio, their small bodies curled up on an air mattress I'd bought just for them. We talked about the future, about school and dreams and the paintings we'd make together. Michael told me he'd won temporary custody and Sarah wasn't fighting it anymore. She's moving to New York. He said, his voice heavy but relieved. She needs to figure herself out. I nodded, my heart aching for the twins, but also hopeful. They had me, Michael, and a love that wouldn't break no matter what came next. The museum unveiling was a turning point, not just for my career, but for my family. The documentary aired a month later, and it was raw, beautiful, showing my journey from that motel room to the museum stage. People wrote to me, women from all over, saying my story had given them courage to leave toxic marriages, chase dreams, or simply keep going. I started a foundation with the museum money, expanding my scholarship fund to help more women, older women, especially find their voices through art. My paintings were in demand, my name a quiet but growing force in the art world, and I was painting more than ever, each canvas a step towards something I couldn't yet name. As I stood in my studio, Lily's and Lucas's laughter echoing from a weekend visit, I felt the weight of everything I'd carried and everything I'd gained. Sarah's words were a distant memory, a scar that had faded but not disappeared. I didn't need her to see me anymore. I saw myself, and so did the world. I picked up a brush, the canvas waiting, and I painted not for approval or forgiveness, but for the joy of it, for the love of it, for the woman I'd always been, and the one I was still becoming. The museum unveiling and Sarah's confrontation felt like a chapter closing, but not the end of my story. I was 63, standing taller than I ever had, my paintings in a New York museum, my name in articles and on lips I'd never met. The documentary had aired, spreading my journey from a motel room to a gallery stage, and my inbox was flooded with messages from women who saw themselves in my struggle, my rise. I'd started a foundation, pouring the museum money into scholarships for older women to chase their art, their dreams, their worth. But as I stood in my studio surrounded by canvases and the faint echo of Lily's and Lucas's laughter from their last visit, I knew the heart of my story wasn't in the accolades or the paint. It was in the love I'd fought for, the family I'd held on to, and the woman I'd become, not for anyone else but for myself. Life settled into a rhythm, not easy, but full. I painted every day, my unbroken series, growing into something that felt alive, like it had its own heartbeat. Galleries in London and San Francisco were showing my work now, and Vanessa was planning a national tour, talking about museum acquisitions and six-figure deals with a certainty that still made me dizzy. I hired Mia full-time, her quiet efficiency a godsend, as orders poured in for prints and commissions. Clara and Amara were my constant stopping by with coffee or advice, their pride in me, a warmth I carried through Chicago's cold winters. I wasn't rich, not in the way people imagine, but I had enough to live, to give, to dream without fear of falling. The twins were my light. Michael had won full custody, and Sarah's move to New York had left a quiet space in their lives, one I filled with love and stories and paint. They spent weekends in my studio, their small hands smearing colors across canvases, their laughter chasing away the ghosts of the past. Lily was 8 now, her questions endless, her drawings fierce with imagination. Lucas was softer, his sketches full of stars and trees, but he'd started talking more, telling me about school, about dreams of being a writer. I made them a new sketchbook, this one called Our Stories, with pages for them to fill alongside mine. "We're a team," Nana Lily said, hugging it close, and Lucas nodded, his eyes steady. Those moments were worth more than any museum, any check. Michael was healing too, though it was slow. He'd found a better job, a construction management role that gave him stability, and he was renting a bigger apartment, one with a room for the twins to call their own. We'd talk over coffee sometimes late into the night about the years we'd lost to Sarah's anger, to his guilt, to my pain. "I should have fought for you sooner, Mom," he said once, his voice breaking. I took his hand, my heart full. "You're here now," I said. "That's enough." And it was. We were rebuilding not just as mother and son, but as a family, piece by careful piece. Sarah's absence was a shadow, but it didn't loom as large as it once had. She'd called Michael a few times asking about the twins, but her visits were rare, her promises thin. I didn't hate her anymore. I'd let that go in the museum corner when I'd seen the woman behind the cold eyes lost in her own battles. I didn't need her to apologize or change. I needed my grandkids to be whole, and I poured everything into that. I painted a small piece for them, a gift for their new room, a grandmother holding 2 children under a sky of stars, the words, "Always here," written in the clouds. When I gave it to them, Lily cried and Lucas hung it above his bed, their love an anchor that kept me steady. My foundation grew too. The Evelyn Carter Scholarship Fund had helped 5 women so far, women like me, older, overlooked with dreams they'd buried under years of sacrifice. One was a 60-year-old seamstress who'd started sculpting, another a 55-year-old nurse painting portraits of her patients. I met them at a small gallery event, their work displayed alongside mine, and their gratitude, their fire reminded me why I'd started this. "You showed us it's not too late," the seamstress said, her hands rough like my mother's. I hugged her, my throat tight, knowing I'd given them what Clara and Amara had given me, belief. The national tour kicked off in spring, my paintings traveling to cities I'd never seen, Boston, Seattle, Miami. I went to some openings speaking to crowds who knew my story from the documentary, their applause a hum that vibrated in my chest. In Seattle, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes, and said my speech had given her the courage to leave an abusive partner. In Miami, an older man told me my paintings reminded him of his late wife, who'd never gotten to chase her dreams. Each story was a thread weaving me into a tapestry bigger than myself, and I carried them home, painting them into new works, each one a tribute to resilience, to love, to the fight we all share. But the moment that defined this chapter came unexpectedly at a small community event in Chicago. I'd been invited to speak at the community center where I'd painted the Legacy mural, a celebration of its 1-year anniversary. The room was modest, filled with familiar faces, locals, shelter residents, the women who'd hugged me when I'd finished the mural. I spoke about my journey, about the $100,000 I'd given the word nanny that had nearly broken me, the art that had saved me. I ended with a line I'd come to live by: "Your worth does not depend on someone else's validation." The applause was warm, but it was what happened next that stopped my heart. A woman stood, her face weathered but kind, and said, "Evelyn, we want to honor you." She gestured to the wall where a plaque had been unveiled, small but shining. The Evelyn Marie Carter Community Art Fund, dedicated to resilience and reclamation. They'd raised money, she said, to support local artists to keep the mural spirit alive. I stood there frozen as the room clapped my eyes, blurring with tears. Clara was there, squeezing my hand. Amara was grinning, snapping photos. Michael and the twins ran to me, Lily shouting, "Nana's a legend," and Lucas beaming proud in a way that made my chest ache. That plaque was my symbol, my heirloom, not just of what I'd done, but of what I'd survived. I thought of my mother sewing until her fingers bled, of Thomas who'd left me to pick up the pieces, of Sarah who'd tried to erase me, and of myself, the girl who'd dreamed under a peach tree, the woman who'd risen from a motel room with nothing but a spark. I didn't need to forgive Sarah, not fully, because forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about me, about letting go, so I could keep rising. I'd done that, And I'd keep doing it for Lily, for Lucas, for every woman who needed to know she was enough. I went home that night, my studio Quiet the City humming outside. I painted not for a gallery or a critic, but for me, a canvas of a woman standing under a sky of stars, her hands full of color, her shadow stretching far behind her. I thought of the twins, sleeping in their new room, the painting I'd made above their beds. I thought of Michael finding his way, and of the women my foundation would lift. My story wasn't finished. There were battles ahead, paintings to create love, to give, but I was ready. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had myself. As I set down my brush, the canvas glowing under the lamplight, I whispered my final message not to the world, but to the girl I'd been, the woman I was, the grandmother I'd always be. Your worth does not depend on someone else's validation. And in that moment, I knew it was true, not just for me, but for anyone who'd ever fought to be seen, to be whole, to be unbroken.